The grand white marble mansion on the hill gleamed under the morning sun, a silent monument to the wealth of Edward Montserrat, one of the richest men in the country. Yet behind its immaculate walls and perfectly trimmed gardens lay a pain that no amount of money could erase. His twin daughters, Clara and Cecilia, now 7 years old, had never spoken a single word. Since birth, doctors had diagnosed them as mute from a congenital condition. They did not speak, they did not laugh, and they communicated only with their eyes, deep, distant eyes that seemed to see something no one else could. Edward had tried everything: the best neurologists, speech therapists, alternative healers, experimental treatments, and even surgeries in international clinics. Nothing worked. The twins remained silent, as if trapped behind an invisible wall that separated them from the world. He spent fortunes chasing answers, but the emptiness inside the house only grew heavier. Since the death of his wife, Helena, during childbirth, he lived tormented by guilt, a pain that gnawed at him every day. Over time, the silence of the children became the silence of the entire mansion. The servants moved through the corridors softly, afraid of their employer's unpredictable temper. Edward spoke to almost no one, and when he did, his words were cold and distant. He believed fate had been cruel, taking his wife and condemning his daughters to a life without a voice. Then, one ordinary morning, a humble woman arrived at the mansion's gates. Her name was Mrs. Lucia, a cleaning lady sent by an agency to replace a worker who had fallen ill. No one could have imagined that this simple woman, with worn shoes and gentle eyes, would soon change the lives of everyone in that house. On her first day, she quietly walked through the rooms, noticing every detail: the portraits of Helena on the walls, the untouched toys in the nursery. When she entered the twins' room, she stopped for a moment, watching them sit on the carpet, stacking colorful blocks in complete silence. Clara and Cecilia lifted their gaze toward her, and something inexplicable happened. It was as if an invisible thread had connected them. Mrs. Lucia smiled softly, and instead of just waving hello, she began to hum an old lullaby, a slow, tender tune that filled the quiet room. The girls didn't react at first, but their wide eyes stayed fixed on her every move. Lucia continued cleaning, still humming, her voice almost like a whisper carried by the wind. By the end of the day, as she was leaving, something extraordinary happened. Clara smiled, a small, shy smile, but enough to make Lucia's heart skip a beat. That night, while Edward dined alone in his vast, echoing dining room, the nanny ran to him, breathless, to say that one of the twins had smiled for the very first time. Edward, tired of false hopes, only shook his head. "You must be mistaken," he muttered, but she wasn't mistaken. Something had indeed changed, something that neither doctors nor science nor all the money in the world could ever explain. The next morning, the mansion seemed unusually still. The staff went about their work as usual, but whispers filled the air. Everyone was talking about what the nanny had seen the night before. Could it really be true? Could one of the Montserrat twins, who had never smiled in 7 years, have shown a sign of emotion for the first time? When Mrs. Lucia arrived for her second day, she felt the weight of all those curious glances, but she didn't say a word. She simply put on her apron, tied her hair back, and started her duties. Yet her heart was drawn once again to the quiet nursery at the end of the long corridor, the room that seemed frozen in time. When she stepped inside, she found Clara and Cecilia sitting near the window, their identical faces turned toward the sunlight. They were staring at the birds perched on the garden fence outside. Lucia watched them silently for a few moments before softly humming the same lullaby she had sung the day before. Almost instantly the twins turned toward her. Their eyes, usually distant and cold, seemed brighter, alive with curiosity. Lucia smiled and began dusting the shelves as she continued to hum. Then she stopped for a moment and did something that no one in that house had ever done for them. She knelt down, bringing herself to their level, and looked at them not as a servant, but as someone who genuinely cared. "Good morning, my little angels," she said softly. "Did you sleep well?" The girls tilted their heads, as if trying to understand. They couldn't answer, not with words, but Lucia saw it again, that faint spark in their eyes, a light trying to break through years of silence. She gently placed a hand over her heart and whispered, "My name is Lucia. Can you say Lucia?" Nothing. The girls only watched. But instead of giving up, Lucia continued. She placed one of the girl's tiny hands over her chest and repeated, "Lucia." She spoke slowly, clearly, letting them feel the vibration of her voice through the warmth of her skin. For the rest of the day, she worked while softly singing old melodies and talking to them as if they could understand every word. She told them stories about her childhood, about her late husband who used to play the guitar, and about her faith, how she believed that kindness could heal even the deepest wounds. Days turned into weeks, and something remarkable began to happen. The twins, once so detached from the world, started reacting. They followed Lucia with their eyes wherever she went, sometimes reaching out their hands as if they didn't want her to leave. When she hummed, they smiled faintly. When she clapped her hands to the rhythm of her song, they tried to imitate her movements, awkwardly at first, but with growing excitement. The nanny noticed the change first. One afternoon she rushed to Mr. Montserrat's office, where he sat behind his massive oak desk buried in paperwork. "Sir," she said, hesitating, "you need to come to the nursery. You must see this." He frowned, irritated. "What is it this time?" "Please," she insisted. "It's the girls." Edward sighed but followed her. When he entered the room, he froze. There, sitting on the carpet, were Clara and Cecilia, clapping their hands and smiling, mimicking Lucia's gestures as she sang to them. The sound of laughter, faint but real, filled the air. For a man who had lived 7 years, in silence, that sound was almost too much to bear. His eyes widened. For a moment he forgot to breathe. What did you do?" he whispered, staring at Lucia. Lucia simply smiled. "Nothing, sir. I just showed them a little love." He said nothing more. He couldn't. The sight of his daughters laughing, even without words, broke something inside him. A wall he had built around his heart began to crumble. But though he was grateful, he was also deeply confused. Why now? Why this woman? He had paid doctors fortunes, and yet a humble cleaner had done in weeks what they never could. That night, Edward couldn't sleep. He stood outside the nursery, watching through the slightly open door, as the twins slept peacefully for the first time in years. Lucia, before leaving, had tucked them in and whispered a quiet prayer over them, a prayer Edward could barely hear, but whose words lingered in the air. "God, open what has been closed, give voice to what has been silent, heal what the world believes is broken." In the weeks that followed, Lucia's presence became the heart of the house. Her songs filled the corridors. Her kindness softened even the coldest hearts among the staff, and the twins began to change in ways no one could explain. They started drawing shapes in the air with their hands, pointing to things and sometimes, just sometimes, murmuring sounds that almost formed syllables. Edward watched in silence, torn between disbelief and awe. Each small progress felt like witnessing a miracle. But deep inside, a part of him feared it, feared what he could not understand, what no doctor could justify. Little did he know that this was only the beginning, and that Lucia's connection with the twins went far beyond simple compassion. There was something divine, mysterious and ancient flowing through her, something that would soon reveal a truth powerful enough to change not only the girls' lives, but his own. Weeks had passed since Mrs. Lucia first set foot in the Montserrat mansion, and by now her presence had become an inseparable part of the household. The staff had grown fond of her calm voice, her soft laughter, and the strange peace that seemed to follow her wherever she went. Even the gardens, which had once felt cold and lifeless, now seemed brighter, as though the flowers bloomed differently when she walked by. But the most astonishing transformation was happening inside the nursery. The twins, Clara and Cecilia, who had lived their entire lives locked in a prison of silence, were now beginning to express themselves in ways no one had imagined possible. At first, it was just small murmurs, barely audible, like whispers carried by the wind. Then came the laughter, fragile but pure. And then, something that made the entire house stop. They started to sing. It was a soft, wordless melody, haunting and beautiful, as if they were trying to echo the lullabies Lucia had hummed for them. The sound drifted through the halls like a breeze of hope, and every time Edward heard it, his chest tightened with emotion he didn't know how to name. He would stand outside the nursery, motionless, listening, afraid that if he moved, the magic would stop. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Edward finally gathered the courage to enter the room. Lucia was sitting on the floor with the twins beside her, their tiny hands resting on hers. A faint golden light from the sunset spilled across their faces, and for a moment it felt like time itself had slowed. "They're changing," he whispered. Lucia looked up at him and smiled. "No, sir, they're awakening." Edward frowned. "Awakening?" "Yes," she said softly, brushing a strand of hair from Cecilia's face. "There are wounds that medicine cannot heal, and voices that cannot be freed by doctors or machines. But love, compassion, and faith, those can awaken even the most silent hearts." Her words unsettled him. For years he had believed in logic, in science, in control. Faith was something he had buried alongside his wife. But now, confronted with the sight of his daughters whispering sounds that shouldn't be possible, he couldn't deny that something extraordinary was taking place. That night, after Lucia left, Edward sat alone in his study, staring at a photograph of Helena. "If you could see them now," he whispered, "you wouldn't believe it. They smiled, Lena. They made sounds." His voice trembled, caught between wonder and disbelief. "And it's because of her, that woman. Who is she really?" The following day, he asked around. None of the agencies could tell him much. Lucia had no family listed, no address besides a small church-run shelter on the outskirts of the city. She didn't own a phone, and when the agency had first contacted her, she had simply walked in from the rain, asking for work. Curiosity turned to obsession. He began to observe her from afar, the way she prayed quietly before meals, the way she touched the girls' heads as if blessing them, the way her presence seemed to bring calm even to the most restless moments. He noticed strange things, too. Lights flickering softly when she entered a room, the air growing warmer, and a faint scent of jasmine that seemed to follow her everywhere. One afternoon, Edward returned early from a business meeting. As he entered the mansion, he heard something that made his blood run cold. A voice, a clear, childlike voice calling softly, "Lucia." He froze. Slowly, he followed the sound to the nursery. There, standing in the middle of the room, was Clara, her lips trembling, her eyes wide. Lucia knelt before her, tears streaming down her face, whispering, "Say it again, my love, say it again." And the little girl did. Lucia. The word was imperfect, shaky, but it was a word, a real, spoken word. Edward felt his knees weaken. He leaned against the doorframe, struggling to breathe. For 7 years he had waited to hear his daughters' voices, and now one of them had spoken. Not a scream, not a cry, but a name, the name of the woman who had brought them back to life. When he finally stepped into the room, his voice broke. How is this possible?" Lucia wiped her tears and turned to him. "Because miracles don't ask for permission, sir. They simply happen when the heart is ready to believe." That night, he couldn't sleep. The mansion, once silent as a tomb, now echoed with faint laughter and tiny footsteps. He wandered through the halls like a man haunted, not by ghosts, but by wonder. He found himself standing before the large portrait of Helena again. Her eyes, painted with such life, seemed to watch him. "I don't know what's happening, Lena," he whispered, "but I feel you here. I feel something greater than all of this." The next morning, something even stranger occurred. When Lucia arrived, the girls ran to her, on both of them, and hugged her tightly. Then, for the first time, Cecilia opened her mouth and whispered something no one could quite understand. The words were soft, almost melodic, and though they didn't form a recognizable language, the tone carried meaning. Lucia listened closely and smiled through tears. "They're not just speaking, sir," she said, turning to Edward. "They're remembering." "Remembering?" he asked. "Yes. Children are closer to heaven than we are. Sometimes their souls remember things we've long forgotten." As she spoke, Edward noticed a light radiating faintly from the girl's hands. Not bright, but visible enough to make his heart race. "What is that?" he whispered. Lucia didn't answer. Instead, she closed her eyes, placed her hands over theirs, and began to pray softly in a language he didn't recognize. The glow faded, but the peace that followed was undeniable. Edward felt something inside him shift. For years, he had lived consumed by pain, guilt, and disbelief. But in that moment, surrounded by the laughter of his once silent daughters and the serenity of this mysterious woman, he realized that he was witnessing something far beyond his understanding, something sacred. From that day forward, everything in the mansion changed. The air felt lighter, the colors brighter. The twins began to interact more, pointing at objects, making sounds that slowly formed words. And though the doctors called it a spontaneous neurological development, Edward knew in his heart it was something far greater. Lucia never sought credit. When people asked how she had done it, she would only smile and say, "I didn't heal them, I just listened to what their silence was trying to say." But deep within Edward's soul, a new question had taken root. Who really was Mrs. Lucia? Because the more he watched her, the more he felt that she wasn't just a woman, but perhaps something sent from beyond, a messenger, a guardian, or even an angel in disguise. The world inside the Montserrat mansion had changed completely. The air, once thick with silence and sorrow, now carried warmth, laughter, and something that could only be described as hope. The staff, who used to walk on eggshells in fear of their employer's temper, now found themselves smiling at the sound of the twins playing in the garden, chasing butterflies and laughing in soft, angelic voices. For Edward Montserrat, the transformation of his daughters was both a blessing and a mystery. Every time Clara and Cecilia spoke, their words fragile but growing stronger, his heart swelled with gratitude and disbelief. Yet beneath his joy, a new feeling began to take root, curiosity mixed with fear. Who exactly was Mrs. Lucia? She had come from nowhere, no family, no records, no past, and yet she had done what the most skilled doctors, scientists, and therapists in the world could not. She had awakened his daughters. Edward could not rest without knowing the truth. He felt that whatever had entered his home through her presence was not ordinary. One cold evening, after everyone had gone to bed, Edward sat alone in his study, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. The dim light from the fireplace flickered across his face as he stared at an envelope lying on the desk. It was from the employment agency that had sent Lucia. He had requested her background information. The paper inside was brief, too brief. Name, Lucia Santos. Address, St. Mary's Shelter for Women and Children. Date of birth, unknown. References, none. Medical history, unavailable. He frowned. Unavailable, he muttered. That was impossible. Everyone left a trace, except her. The next morning, he made an excuse to leave the mansion and drove himself to St. Mary's Shelter, an old stone building at the edge of the city, run by a small group of nuns. As he entered, the scent of burning candles and old wood filled the air. A young nun greeted him gently. "Good morning, sir. How may I help you?" "I'm looking for information about one of your residents, Mrs. Lucia Santos." The nun's smile faded slightly. She exchanged a quick, uneasy glance with another sister before answering. "Oh, Lucia." Her tone carried something between reverence and hesitation. She hasn't lived here for some time." "How long ago did she leave?" Edward asked. "About 6 months ago, I believe. She simply appeared one day. exhausted, soaked from the rain. We gave her food and a place to sleep. She was very quiet, very kind. She spent her nights praying in the chapel and helping with the children. And then, one morning, she was gone. She left a note. The nun walked over to a small drawer and retrieved a folded piece of paper. She hesitated for a moment before handing it to him. The note was written in delicate cursive. "When the time comes, I will be where silence cries for mercy. When light must return to those who cannot speak, there you will find me." Lucia Edward read the message several times, his pulse quickening. "Where silence cries for mercy," the phrase echoed in his mind. "Do you know anything about her past?" he asked. The nun shook her head. "Only that she once spoke of losing a child. She said she prayed for the gift to heal others so that no mother would suffer the same pain she did. After that, she spoke very little of herself." Edward left the shelter with more questions than answers. On the drive back, memories of his wife flooded his mind. Her faith, her gentle voice, the way she used to pray every night before bed. He had abandoned all of that after her death, but now it was as if God himself had sent Lucia to his doorstep. That night, something strange happened. As the family gathered for dinner, the lights in the dining hall began to flicker. A sudden wind blew through the windows, though they were tightly closed. The twins froze, staring toward the end of the long table, their eyes wide and glassy. "Girls," Edward said cautiously. Cecilia whispered, "Mama." Edward's heart stopped. "What did you say?" "Mama's here." The words came out soft but clear. Then both girls turned their heads toward the same empty corner of the room. For a fleeting second, Edward could have sworn he saw it. A faint, luminous figure of a woman, her face serene, her eyes filled with tenderness. Then it was gone, like mist dissolving into air. The twins ran to Lucia and hugged her tightly. "Mama says thank you," Clara whispered against her chest. Lucia's eyes filled with tears, but she said nothing. That night, Edward couldn't ignore it anymore. He knocked on Lucia's door as she was finishing her prayers. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice trembling. Lucia looked up at him calmly. "I'm just a woman, sir." "No," he insisted, stepping closer. "You're not just a woman. My daughters spoke because of you. They saw something tonight. I saw something tonight. Please, I need the truth." She sighed softly and rose to her feet. "The truth, Mr. Montserrat, is that your daughters were never broken. They were born with a gift the world couldn't understand. Their silence was not a curse, but a shield, a protection from the noise of this world. They heard things others couldn't. They saw what others refused to see." He stared at her, speechless. She continued, "When I came here, I didn't come to heal them. I came because I was called. Their souls cried out, and I heard them. That's why I knew what to do, not because I'm special, but because I listened." Her voice trembled as she looked toward the window. "Your wife is at peace, Mr. Montserrat. She's been watching over them, and over you. You've lived buried under guilt, but she forgave you long ago." Edward felt his throat tighten. You can see her." Lucia smiled faintly. "Sometimes, but it's not seeing, it's feeling. The light of love doesn't vanish when the body dies. It just changes form." The room went silent except for the ticking of the old clock on the wall. For the first time in years, Edward felt tears slide down his face. "Then why are you here?" he asked. "To finish what began the day your wife left this world," Lucia whispered. "To bring peace to the hearts that still carry her pain." That night, Edward dreamed of Helena. She stood in a field of white lilies, smiling softly. "Take care of them, Ed," she said, "and trust the one who carries my prayer." When he awoke, the morning sun was spilling through the curtains, warm and golden. He could hear laughter from the garden, the twins playing again with Lucia. For a moment, everything felt right, but deep inside, Edward knew something was coming. He could feel it in the air, a strange tension, like the calm before a storm, and he couldn't shake the fear that the woman who had brought light into their lives might soon disappear, just as suddenly as she had come. Days had turned into weeks, and the Montserrat mansion, once a hollow shell of marble and sorrow, now pulsed with an energy that felt almost sacred. The laughter of the twins filled every corridor, echoing through the high ceilings like the sound of bells in a forgotten chapel. But beneath that joy, there was an invisible current, something powerful, unexplainable, almost divine, running through the air. Edward had begun to sense it more and more each day. It was in the flicker of the candles when Lucia entered a room. It was in the way the air seemed to grow warmer whenever she touched the twins' hands. And it was in the deep, unsettling dreams that now visited him every night, dreams of his late wife standing in a garden of light, whispering a name that always vanished before he could understand it. Lucia, however, seemed more fragile. Her smile was softer, slower. Sometimes Edward would find her sitting in the chapel, hands clasped in prayer, tears silently streaming down her face. He wanted to ask her what was happening, but something in her eyes, a distant grief, an ancient wisdom, always stopped him. One evening, as a thunderstorm rolled across the hills, Edward found her kneeling in the nursery. The twins were fast asleep, but Lucia's lips moved in silent prayer as she touched their foreheads. A soft glow, faint but real, seemed to radiate from her fingertips. Edward froze in the doorway, unable to look away. For a moment, it was as if the storm outside and the light inside were in perfect balance. Chaos and peace intertwined. "What are you doing?" he finally whispered. Lucia turned slowly, her expression calm but tired. "I'm protecting them." "From what?" She looked past him, her gaze fixed on something unseen. "From what's coming?" Edward stepped forward. "You speak in riddles, Lucia. What's coming? Tell me what you mean." She shook her head gently. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you. Not yet." "I've seen enough to believe anything," he said. "My daughters spoke. They laughed. They saw their mother. And I saw her too. So don't tell me I wouldn't believe." Lucia stood up slowly. The candlelight caught her face, serene, almost luminous. "Then listen carefully, Mr. Montserrat. There are things in this world that science cannot name and faith alone can barely contain. Your daughters are part of something greater than any of us understand. And you," she paused, "you were chosen to protect them." Edward's pulse quickened. "Chosen? By whom?" Before she could answer, a sharp crash echoed through the mansion. One of the heavy windows in the hall had burst open, the storm raging inside like a furious spirit. Edward rushed to close it, and as he did, he heard something, a whisper carried by the wind. It wasn't the sound of the storm. It was a voice, a woman's voice. "Lucia!" He turned sharply toward her, but she stood perfectly still, her eyes closed as if listening. "Did you hear that?" he asked. "Yes," Lucia said softly. "She's been calling me." Edward's heart pounded. "Who?" Lucia opened her eyes. "Helena." For a long moment neither spoke. The thunder rolled like drums in the distance, and lightning flashed through the windows, illuminating the fear on Edward's face. "My wife," he whispered. "You're saying my wife calls to you?" Lucia nodded. "She's closer now than ever. The bond between this world and the next is thinner than you think. Every prayer, every tear, every memory, it leaves a mark, and she left hers on this house." Edward stepped back, struggling to breathe. "Why? What does she want?" Lucia's voice dropped to a whisper. "To finish what she began." He didn't understand, but before he could press further, the twins screamed from upstairs. Both of them. At the same time, Edward raced up the grand staircase, Lucia right behind him. The nursery door swung open with a violent gust of wind that extinguished every candle in the hall. Inside, the girls were sitting upright in their beds, their eyes wide with terror. "What is it, my loves?" Edward said, kneeling between them. Clara pointed toward the corner of the room. "The light! It's crying." Edward turned his head and froze. There, in the corner near the old wooden cross, a faint golden light shimmered like a heartbeat. Within it, the outline of a woman took shape, gentle, radiant, and familiar. Lucia gasped, falling to her knees. "It's her!" Edward couldn't move. The figure stepped forward, her voice echoing softly like a hymn. "Do not fear, my love. My time is short. but theirs is only beginning. "Helena," Edward whispered, tears spilling down his cheeks. "Is it really you?" The light trembled. "You closed your heart after I left, but God never did. He sent her to open it again." Edward turned to Lucia, but her face was pale, almost transparent in the golden glow. She trembled, clutching her chest as if her strength were fading. "Lucia!" he cried, catching her before she fell. She looked at him weakly, her eyes filled with something between pain and peace. "The bridge between your world and hers is opening, Edward, but once it does, it cannot stay open for long." The twins clung to their father, crying softly. "Daddy, Mama says we have to listen." "Listen to what?" Edward asked desperately. Lucia lifted her trembling hand and pointed to the glowing figure. "To the truth." At that moment, the storm outside grew violent. The lights flickered, the windows rattled, and the crucifix above the bed fell to the floor with a sharp crack. Lucia's body shone faintly, her skin glimmering like fine dust in the candlelight. The girls stared at her, eyes wide with awe rather than fear. Cecilia whispered, "She's glowing like the angels in Mama's stories." Edward felt a chill crawl down his spine. "Lucia, what are you?" he asked, but she didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the golden figure in the corner. The two seemed connected, as if threads of light wove between them. Edward tried to move, but something rooted him in place. The air grew thick, charged, vibrating with unseen power. Then the voice came again, Helena's, clearer, stronger, closer. "Edward, remember the promise you made when they were born. Protect them, believe, and when the time comes, let her go." The last words hit him like thunder. "Let her go." He turned to Lucia, but her form was shifting, her outline flickering between shadow and light, like a flame caught between two worlds. "No!" he shouted. "Lucia, stay with us! Don't you dare leave them!" Lucia looked at him with tears in her eyes. "I don't want to, Edward, but what's coming cannot be stopped, only prepared for." "What's coming?" he demanded again, his voice breaking. Lucia took his hand, her touch cold but comforting. "The day when silence will speak louder than words, when faith will be tested not by what you see, but by what you're willing to lose." The thunder roared. The golden figure began to fade, and the girls cried out, reaching toward it. "Mama, don't go!" Lucia turned to them, whispering through her tears. "She's not leaving. She's waiting, on the other side of the light." The glow dimmed until it vanished completely, leaving the room in trembling silence. Only the sound of the rain remained. Edward held his daughters close, his heart pounding in confusion and fear. When he looked down at Lucia, she was pale, her breathing shallow, her strength nearly gone. But her eyes burned with something holy. "It's not the end," she murmured, her voice faint but steady. "It's the beginning of what was promised." Then, before Edward could speak, she closed her eyes and whispered something so soft he almost didn't catch it. "When the dawn breaks, everything will change." And in that moment the storm began to calm. But Edward knew this was only the calm before the revelation. The days following the storm felt almost unreal. The mansion existed in a strange half-light, as if suspended between two realities, one ordinary, one divine. The servants whispered among themselves, uneasy but reverent. Something had changed. Even the flowers in the garden bloomed wildly out of season, and a faint scent of lilies seemed to follow Lucia wherever she went. Edward Montserrat tried to convince himself that life had returned to normal, that the vision of Helena in the nursery had been nothing but exhaustion or grief playing tricks on him. Yet, each time he looked into his daughter's eyes, he saw something different, something ancient and knowing, as if they now understood more than any child should. The twins, once silent, now spoke freely, but sometimes, in the middle of their laughter, they would stop, tilt their heads slightly, and whisper words that chilled their father to the bone. "She says it's almost time," Cecilia murmured one morning, her gaze fixed on the window. "Who says that, sweetheart?" Edward asked gently. "Our mother," Clara answered. "But she's not sad anymore. She's waiting for someone." Lucia, standing nearby with a laundry basket in her arms, froze at those words. For a brief moment, her face went pale. She set the basket down slowly and whispered, "What did she say she's waiting for?" The girls looked at each other. Then Clara replied, "For the day the sun cries." Edward frowned. "What does that mean?" Lucia didn't answer. She only crossed herself and turned her face toward the window, where a thin ray of light pierced through the clouds. That evening, after the children were asleep, Edward found Lucia in the old chapel again. The flickering candles cast shadows that seemed to move on their own across the cracked walls. She was kneeling before the altar, her hands trembling, whispering words he couldn't understand. Not English, not Latin, something older. He waited until her prayer ended, then spoke softly, "Lucia, what's happening to my family?" She turned slowly, her eyes glistening with tears. "What's happening is not a curse, Mr. Montserrat. It's a calling." "A calling," he repeated, his voice rising. "My daughters are talking to spirits. Light is appearing in their room. And you expect me to believe this is good?" Lucia stood up, her face illuminated by the candlelight. "You've lived your whole life chasing power and wealth, Edward. You built walls of stone around your heart. But your daughters, they were born with open souls. They could see what you refused to see. That's why they were silent. They didn't belong fully to this world." He shook his head in disbelief. "You're saying they're, what, angels? Prophets?" "No," she said softly. "Just children who carry light inside them. Light that was almost lost when their mother died. But it was never gone completely. It only needed someone to awaken it." He looked at her intensely. "And that someone was you." Lucia didn't answer. She walked toward the altar and placed her hand over the old wooden cross. "I was chosen to find them. That's all I know." Edward's voice broke. "Chosen by whom?" Lucia hesitated. Her lips trembled before she whispered, "By the same voice that called their mother home." A silence filled the chapel. The candles flickered violently, though there was no wind. Edward felt a chill crawl through him. Then, somewhere deep in the mansion, a sound echoed, faint, melodic, like a lullaby. Lucia looked up sharply. "Do you hear that?" He nodded. "It's coming from upstairs." Together they rushed to the nursery. When they entered, the twins were standing by the window, bathed in moonlight, humming a tune neither had ever been taught. Outside, the sky glowed faintly crimson, though there was no sun, no fire, only a soft, eerie light over the distant hills. "Girls," Edward said carefully, "what are you doing?" Clara smiled without turning around. "We're singing Mama's song." Lucia approached slowly, her voice trembling. "Who taught you that?" "She did," Cecilia replied. "In our dream, she said the light is coming soon." Edward's stomach tightened. "What light?" "The one that will make everyone remember," Clara whispered. Suddenly, the air grew cold. The window pane fogged over, and on its surface letters began to appear, written from the inside. Edward's breath caught as he read the faint words forming before his eyes. "Do not fear the dawn." He stumbled back, his mind spinning. "Lucia, tell me I'm not seeing this." Lucia didn't answer. She raised her hand, touching the glass lightly, and as her fingers met the misty writing, the letters glowed bright gold before fading away. The twins turned around, their faces serene, eyes shining with tears. "She says the dawn will come when everyone is ready," Cecilia said softly. Edward's heart pounded in his chest. "What does that mean?" he demanded. Lucia stepped away from the window, her expression unreadable. "It means something is awakening, something that has been waiting a long time." Her voice trembled slightly, as if even she feared what she was saying. That night, Edward couldn't sleep. He paced the halls of the mansion, haunted by every shadow, every whisper of the wind. In his dreams, he saw Helena standing on the shore of a dark ocean, holding two small lights in her hands, one for each child. Behind her, a third light flickered, distant but growing stronger. When he tried to reach her, the ocean turned to fire. He awoke, drenched in sweat. Downstairs, he found Lucia sitting alone in the drawing room, staring into the embers of the dying fire. "You can't keep hiding the truth from me," he said hoarsely. "I saw her again. in my dream, and I think she's trying to warn us." Lucia turned her head slowly. "Dreams are never just dreams, Mr. Montserrat. They are doors. Some are opened by grief, others by grace." He sat across from her, his voice desperate. "Then tell me what door has been opened in my house." Lucia looked into the fire, her expression solemn. "One that connects love and loss, life and death. Your wife opened it with her prayers. Your daughters keep it open with their innocence, and now—" She paused, her voice breaking. "Now it's beginning to open for me." He frowned. "For you? Why?" Lucia's hands trembled in her lap. "Because my time is almost over here." Edward stood abruptly. "No, don't say that. You're not leaving." "I don't have a choice," she whispered. "Every miracle comes with a price. Every light burns something to shine. I can feel it. The closer the dawn gets, the weaker I become." He leaned forward, gripping her shoulders. "There has to be a way to stop it." Lucia smiled sadly. "You can't stop what's holy, Edward. You can only accept it." The room fell silent except for the faint ticking of the clock. Then, from upstairs, a voice echoed, soft, familiar, unmistakable. "Edward!" He froze. The voice was Helena's. Clear, real. Lucia looked up, tears glistening in her eyes. "She's here." Edward turned toward the staircase. A pale light began to spill down the steps, shimmering like water in the moonlight. The twins appeared at the top, holding hands, their faces calm. "Daddy," Clara said softly, "she wants us to go to the garden." Lucia's breath caught. "The garden. The one where Mama used to pray," Cecilia added. Edward hesitated, but something in their voices, gentle yet certain, made him obey. Together they walked out into the night. The rain had stopped, and the air smelled of wet earth and roses. The moon hung low and red over the horizon. In the center of the garden, beneath the old oak tree, the earth shimmered faintly. It was as if the ground itself breathed with light. Lucia fell to her knees, whispering prayers through her tears. "It's beginning." Edward knelt beside her. "What is? Tell me what's happening." She didn't answer. The wind rose suddenly, swirling around them, carrying faint voices, laughter, whispers, fragments of song. The twins stood still, unafraid, their eyes fixed on the glowing ground, and then, slowly, a shape began to emerge within the light. Faint, human, familiar. Lucia covered her mouth, tears spilling down her face. Edward felt his entire world tilt. The figure was radiant, yet fragile, as though it were woven from moonlight and memory. It was Helena. "Edward," the voice said softly, echoing through the garden. "The light is coming." Lucia bowed her head, trembling. The twins smiled through their tears. Edward reached out a hand, but before he could touch her, the light flickered violently. The air grew heavy, the wind stopped, and in that stillness a low hum began to vibrate through the ground. Lucia gasped, "No, not yet! It's too soon!" Edward turned to her, terrified. "What's too soon?" Lucia didn't answer. She clutched the cross around her neck and whispered, "Something has awakened before the time was right." The light around Helena's figure began to distort, trembling like a flame in a storm. The twins cried out, "Daddy! Mama's in pain!" Edward tried to move, but the force of the wind suddenly pushed him back. He shielded his daughters with his arms as Lucia stood, her hair whipping around her face, her voice rising above the roar. "Please, not yet! Give us more time!" The glow intensified until the entire garden was bathed in blinding light. Edward screamed her name, "Lucia!" but couldn't see her anymore. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. The garden fell into silence. The air was cold again, the light gone, and only the faint scent of lilies remained. Lucia lay on the ground, unconscious. The twins sobbed quietly beside her, and Edward knelt, shaking her shoulders. "Lucia, wake up, please!" Her eyelids fluttered and she whispered faintly, "It's not the end yet. The dawn hasn't come." Her voice faded into silence, and as the first pale light of morning touched the horizon, Edward realized something horrifying. The cross around Lucia's neck was glowing softly, and her pulse could no longer be found. Yet her body was warm. The first rays of dawn barely touched the horizon, casting a pale glow over the Montserrat mansion. Edward sat in the garden, holding his trembling daughters in his arms. Lucia lay unconscious a few feet away, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. The garden was silent, except for the soft rustling of leaves and the faint scent of lilies, lingering like a whisper of what had just happened. Edward's mind raced, desperate to understand. The events of the night had broken the boundaries of reality. His daughters had spoken to spirits, the air had vibrated with unseen energy, and Lucia, the woman who had entered their lives like a fleeting angel, now seemed to hang between life and something far beyond it. Cecilia clung to him, whispering, "Daddy, is she going to be okay?" Edward swallowed hard. I don't know, but we'll protect her. Whatever happens, we won't let her go." Clara, however, seemed unusually calm for a child her age. "She's not leaving, Daddy. Mama sent her." Edward's chest tightened. "Sent her?" "Yes," Clara replied softly. "Mama says Lucia has a mission. She was chosen to bring us the light before the dawn. She said we have to trust her." Edward looked down at the twins and felt a mix of awe and fear. The innocence in their eyes belied the depth of what they had witnessed. Somehow, in their short lives, they had understood more than he ever could. Then, as if in answer to their thoughts, the faint shimmer of light returned. Slowly, it rose from the ground where Lucia lay, swirling around her like a gentle current. Edward gasped, reaching for her hand, but it was as if the light itself held him back, urging patience. Lucia's eyes fluttered open. The first thing she saw was Edward's face, filled with worry, and then the twins clinging to him. She tried to speak, but no sound came. Her hand rose tremblingly toward the girls, and the moment it touched them, a wave of warmth and radiant energy spread outward. Edward felt his chest tighten as tears rolled down his face. The sensation was like being immersed in sunlight after years of darkness, a pure, almost holy warmth that penetrated every fear, every sorrow he had ever known. Clara whispered, "She's glowing, just like Mama said." Edward watched, astonished. Lucia's form began to shift, no longer entirely human, yet not fully divine. Her eyes glowed faintly gold, and her voice, soft, melodic, and yet carrying the weight of eternity, filled the garden. "I am here to complete what was begun," she said. "Not by my hand alone, but through the faith of those who love beyond life, through the prayers of those who have never lost hope." Edward's voice trembled. "Lucia, what are you?" She smiled gently. "I am a messenger, a vessel for what your wife left behind, and for the light your daughters carry. I was sent to guide them and through them, to awaken the world to what is unseen." The twins moved closer to her, their small hands touching her glowing form. And in that instant, a vision unfolded before Edward's eyes, a radiant living tapestry of memories, prayers, and love. He saw Helena, alive not in body but in spirit, weaving threads of protection and hope over her children, over Edward, over Lucia. He saw his daughters, their voices now strong and clear, carrying melodies that resonated with the very heartbeat of the world. And he saw Lucia standing at the center, a bridge between what was lost and what was to come. "Edward," she whispered, "your wife's love never left. It became me, and through me it returns to you. But this light, it requires trust, faith, and above all, courage." He felt a tremor of understanding. The miracles, the visions, the awakening of his daughters, none of it had been random. Every moment, every choice, every silent tear had been part of a plan he could only now begin to comprehend. Then, the ground beneath them began to pulse faintly, like the rhythm of a heartbeat. The golden light surrounding Lucia intensified, spreading outward in waves. Edward clutched the twins, shielding them not from danger, but from the overwhelming beauty and power that now filled the garden. "Do not be afraid," Lucia said, her voice rising, echoing with a resonance that seemed to come from the heavens themselves. "This is the dawn, Not the dawn of a day, but the dawn of understanding, of hope, of redemption. The silence has ended. The voices have returned. The light will remain, but only if you carry it forward, Edward. Only if you continue what has begun. Edward's eyes burned with tears. "I understand," he whispered. "I'll protect them. I'll do whatever it takes." The twins smiled up at him, their voices strong now, harmonizing in a way that seemed to carry through the very fabric of reality. "We will, Daddy. Mama showed us the way." Lucia took a deep, trembling breath. "The mission is almost complete, but I must return to where I belong. My time here is a gift, not a right." Edward shook his head violently. "No, you can't leave us. You saved them. You saved me." She looked at him with infinite kindness. "I am not leaving because of your will, Edward. I am leaving because of the will that sent me. But know this, I am never gone. I will always exist where the light remains. In them, in you, in the world. They will touch." Edward's hands trembled as he realized what she meant. The light surrounding Lucia began to spiral upward, rising like smoke of gold and white fire. The twins reached up instinctively, feeling it brush against their fingers. "Clara, Cecilia, hold on to what you feel," Edward whispered. "Don't let it go." And then, with a soft, almost musical sigh, Lucia's form began to dissolve into the light. She did not vanish. Rather, she became part of it, a brilliant golden radiance that entwined with the air, the earth, and the souls around her. Edward fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face, holding his daughters close as the last remnants of her presence shimmered in the garden. Thank you," he whispered over and over. The twins looked up at him with understanding far beyond their years. "She's still with us," Clara said. "She'll always be." Edward nodded, his heart full of grief and gratitude. And then, just as the sun crested the horizon, bathing the mansion in golden light, he heard it. A soft, familiar voice carried on the wind. "Edward, never forget. The light begins with faith, grows with love, and shines forever in the hearts who keep it alive." He closed his eyes, letting the warmth wash over him. The storm of the past had passed. Silence had finally been replaced by a voice, not just the voice of his daughters, but the voice of hope, redemption, and the eternal love that had bound his family together beyond the limits of life itself. And in that moment, Edward Montserrat knew, for the first time in years, that everything had changed. The mansion, the family, the world he thought he understood, all of it would never be the same again. He opened his eyes, holding the twins tightly. "We'll honor it," he whispered. "We'll keep the light alive." And somewhere beyond the horizon, the golden light lingered, a promise that miracles do not end, they only begin anew.